right. Well, hello, class, and welcome to the beginning of week three. We've got Katie here, and Don, and Bill. Hello.
Hello.
Um,
Hi.
to recap some of the discussion that took place in the forums last week, and then to set you up for some of the things that are coming in the coming week, in week three. Just to recap, there was quite a bit of discussion in the forums, and I think a lot of confusion about the store of value function and whether Bitcoin fulfills that function of money very well or not. And one of the things you need to bear in mind here with the store of value idea is the idea is that if I somehow have, let's make it an agricultural commodity. Let's say I have a whole bunch of corn. That's great. And if I have someone who can buy it and I can trade with it, well, then I can make some money off of it. But the corn all by itself, if I just put it in a storehouse, isn't a particularly good store of value because over time it's going to rot, the mice are getting it into it, the rain might get into it and ruin it, that kind of a thing. So what do I do? What I do is I convert it into an equivalent amount of money somehow. And then money, it's imagined, money will hold its value better than any other kind of commodity. So when we're thinking about the store of value function, you have to ask yourself, is this thing, whatever it is, holding its value over time and holding it better than other things that might be available to hold that value? All right. Now think about Bitcoin. Does it really hold its value over time? Well, it depends on the kind of time frame that you're looking at. But when you sort of look at it from its inception until today, you'll see that its value has really fluctuated an awful lot. So if I wanted to put, if I wanted to save value and preserve value, and I had the choice of Bitcoin or the US dollar, well, when you look at the volatility of the dollar over the same period of time, it's not as great as Bitcoin had experienced. So probably the dollar is going to be my better bet. And that's the kind of question that that you have to ask, that we're asking when we ask, is Bitcoin a good store of value?
And to sort of clarify, some people felt like the store of value was about whether or not one Bitcoin was going to be one Bitcoin in the future, and whether two Bitcoins was going to be more than one Bitcoin in the future. And that reflects the fact that Bitcoin's, a mathematically sound instrument, but the store of value has more to do with whether people think that two Bitcoin are worth anything. And that's
Right.
that's outside of the blockchain.
Right, and whether two Bitcoin are going to be worth tomorrow what they were worth today, not in terms of Bitcoin, but in terms of everything else in the universe, right? Are two Bitcoin tomorrow going to be worth the same number of gallons of milk as they are today? Are two Bitcoin tomorrow going to be worth the same amount of gold as they are today? That's the question that we're asking. Can it hold its value? And one interesting thing when you look at the businesses that accept Bitcoin, what a lot of them are doing is when they receive Bitcoin as payment for a good or service, most of them are immediately transferring that directly into dollars, right? They want to be able to say to the consumer, look, we accept Bitcoin, look how cool we are. But as soon as they get a payment in Bitcoin, they're converting it into US dollars and sticking those dollars in the bank because the dollar is going to hold its value more reliably, they're presuming, they're guessing,
And I think
than Bitcoin.
that's drawing out these kind of two ways. We haven't talked about it very much. A couple of the threads have talked about it, but the two different ways that Bitcoin operates both as a currency, but also as a technology for moving the currency. So we've talked about it being rails and freight. It both moves the money and it is the money. But when the companies are using Bitcoin and immediately turning it to dollars, they're really just using the blockchain to transfer that value, but they're not keeping the currency around. And those services are provided by the companies that do the payment gateways, just like they do payment gateways for Visa or MasterCard or whatever.
And in not this coming week, but the next week, we're going to be talking quite a bit about the existing payment rails. And again, in the payments industry, people use these railroad metaphors to talk about the infrastructure, right? The kind of the railroad infrastructure that carries the money that moves along the rails on the train track. This week, we're actually going to be diving into the rail of Bitcoin, which is the blockchain, really getting into that database, that blockchain database to understand how it works. But another thing that came up in the forums we wanted to address is the means of payment function. And the means of payment thing is different from means of exchange. When we're talking about means of exchange, we're talking about people using a form of money essentially in a market transaction where there's supply and demand and there's price. Your basic, straightforward economic transaction. For payment, for means of payment, we're talking about non-market transactions. And it's hard to think about sometimes because we think that money is just about buying and selling stuff, but money is also about paying a toll, paying a library overdue book fine, or paying a parking ticket. And none of those things have prices that are set by the market. So when you ask yourself, can a form of money fulfill the means of payment function in this very specific technical sense? What you're asking is, can it be used in a non-market-based transaction to do something like pay a fine or pay a fee? And some of you got that and had some really great discussions in the various threads in the forum. And there was even some neat discussion about a proposal in New York City to allow for the payment of, I think it was parking tickets in Bitcoin. And y'all can look in the forums and find where that was being discussed if you're interested. But that's that other function of money.
I thought it was kind of funny to think about New York taking Bitcoin for a parking ticket and then thinking about what the reaction would be if New York decided to take Chinese currency or African currency for the payment of a parking ticket. And that kind of just seems outrageous, and yet it doesn't seem crazy for Bitcoin. And so it kind of speaks a little bit to about maybe what the function of Bitcoin is, as opposed to what the function of money is. And do you want to mention that briefly, Bill?
No, absolutely. And that came up in one of the discussions as well. Instead of asking about the functions of money, if we start asking about the functions of Bitcoin, you can start to see how Bitcoin is serving to fill a number of roles. It's marking people as technologically savvy, as cutting edge, right? It's doing a kind of symbolic function here. It's a way of conveying one's political allegiances in some cases, because a lot of folks who are involved in Bitcoin tend to take anti-government stances on things. And Katie, maybe you could speak to some of the folks that you've studied in your research, some of the Bitcoin users that you've encountered, and for them, what the function of Bitcoin is.
Yeah, definitely. So as you mentioned, one thing is that people just really like the technological side of it. One word that came up when I was talking to users a lot was that it was cool, which I thought was kind of funny. Like, you wouldn't say the US dollar is cool, right? So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect, as you mentioned, was that, yeah, for a lot of users, it's a way to demonstrate their political beliefs. Many of the people spoke to either identified as libertarian or anarchist. So for them, Bitcoin was a way to kind of get away from an economic system that they didn't necessarily agree with, because they felt like that the government could just print money, and the banks could really harm people in some of the things that they did. If you look at the Great Recession, that's a great example of that. So they wanted to kind of resist those instances by using Bitcoin. And for a lot of them, they felt that maybe Bitcoin would actually become one of the major currencies in the world eventually. So they were also kind of trying to prepare for that by getting involved now.
Great.
And this coming week will be a very interesting time to watch debates and discussions about money and its connection to ideology. Because just today, the Greek populace rejected the EU in their referendum, and a lot of interesting things are probably going to take place of the money in the market starting tomorrow. So
you might even want to watch the price of Bitcoin, because
yeah,
that would be a place where the Greek people might want to put some store of value.
Yep.
So should we talk about next week?
Yes, let's talk about next week. We're going to dive into the blockchain, and we're going to have you all send little bits of Bitcoin back and forth to one another. And Don, maybe you can review what we're going to do.
Yeah, we're going to have a lab where we send Bitcoin. And what we're asking you to do is, the normal case would be for people to sign up with a Coinbase account. Although if you want to run the Satoshi client, if you know about that, then you can do that. But the easiest thing to do, and the instructions we'll give you, is to do the Coinbase account. And you will post your address in the forum, and I will send you a little bit of Bitcoin, and you will receive it, and then you will send the Bitcoin back to me that you receive, right? You're going to send the Bitcoin back. Thank you. Minus the small transaction fees that the miners take, and you may be surprised to see that the miners are in fact requiring transaction fees in order to bundle your Bitcoin these days. And then we're going to ask you to find that transaction in the public ledger. And so you'll be able to say, I sent some Bitcoin back and forth. And I guess in this case, it's maybe a method of payment because you're not getting anything back. Maybe a grade.
It's great, yeah, but it's not a market-based transaction.
That's right.
And another thing, what that's going to give you insight into is what that public ledger looks like, how the blockchain works as a ledger. And we're really excited that we've got Kevin McCoy, who's the founder of Monograph, to come and speak to the class. Monograph is a company that uses the public ledger of Bitcoin to do something else, and we'll let him talk to you about what he's using it to do. He's using it not to serve a money function, but as to do something else. And he's going to be in a live video chat with us this coming Tuesday at 10 in the morning Pacific time. That's Tuesday at 10 a.m. And we'll put all the information in the weekly roadmap that we'll send out in a bit. And it'll also be available on the website. And if you can join, if you are able to be there with us, there'll be instructions online for how to join and listen in and even send in some questions. If you can't join, that's no big deal because we're going to record the whole thing and put it up on YouTube, and you can watch it there. And you can also post questions there as well. And either Mr. McCoy or one of us will respond. But we've got a guy who's created this really interesting startup that uses the blockchain, and he's going to be coming to talk to the class. So that's another exciting thing up this week.
Okay.
We should say there's also other work this week, but nothing you haven't done before. You're not just going to be sending Bitcoin back and forth and seeing this guy talk about his cool company. There are lectures as usual, the forum posts, just like last week and the week before, where we're requiring 2 forum posts. And there's going to be another quiz it's going to be available on the team multiple choice questions, open note, open book, nothing you can't handle. Just make sure that you stay on top of it. Everyone's been really great so far in terms of staying on top of the assignments and getting your forum posts in on time and also responding to one another. And
yes.
We really like to see it when those forum threads get longer and longer because you're all talking to each other, and the 3 of us aren't the ones having to drive the conversation all the time. So we really appreciate that. And it looks like you all are learning some cool stuff. So that makes us very happy.
Okay. So we'll be online in week 3.
Yep. Welcome to week 3. We'll see you in the forums.
Bye.
Bye.